No? Nope, you don't need to get on at all.
Probably ought to stop the recording then, though.
6 p.m. If we could go ahead and call the board, please.
Yes, the meeting is called to order at 6 p.m. The roll call, President Palmer,
Here.
Vice President Taylor,
Here.
Director Army,
Here.
Director Ross,
Here.
Director O'Neill is absent at this point.
Right, you can all stand and join me in the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Welcome everybody. Thanks for being here this evening. Right in here is item 4, the rest is on this. We'll give reports on it. We say that on behalf of the district. Am I right? Yeah, we're all together. Okay, then item 5 is public comment. Members of the public may address the board on any item that's not on tonight's agenda. We'll have time to speak on the agenda items later, but if there's anything you want to address the board about not on the agenda, it's now is the time.
My buddy's name is,
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're in
I'm not very, I haven't public spoken for a while. So, my name's Carter Judy. I live at 2279 Alamo Potato Road, Solvay, outside of the district. I've come to return some of your guys' construction equipment that's been on my property. There's Stantec, is that the company that you guys hired? One of you probably there, but just put in, I don't, he's as upset about it as I am. They trespassed on a shared easement at our house, a private road, and we're gonna paint on our brand new asphalt driveway. It was laid probably a week prior, and drive this stake right here in the ground. They did drive that stake. You know where they put it from?
Yeah, right out in front of my list.
Yeah, right up there.
Yeah, between my list here, horse cross.
Right. So on a private road, my wife was there for a couple hours. They said that they were there for 2 hours. And she didn't ask them to leave. The guys are very nice, the people that did it, but the fact that they're coming on our property unannounced and doing construction, I mean, this could have been put next to irrigation pipe, put on the other side of the road, got a broken pipe. I'm sure they didn't call Big Safe. They said they were mapping out Los Olivos for the Los Olivos Community Service District. They said they were instructed to do this. So I was curious, and I asked a couple other people. Understand they went up to the Margaret Fells private lake that they have up on Keegan, private road. Spray painted on there, tried to spray paint up there to make the mark. We drove up the private road behind our clinic on Alamo Potato against on Santa Barbara Avenue behind Alamo Potato Equine Clinic. Painted 2 giant stars on the asphalt, which are still there. And then come off until someone cleans it off. So my concern is that I've looked at the district, and it's pretty clear based on the map that you guys provide on the website that there's one other place they went beyond, about 200 yards further south, I don't know, Potato, to Tina Brunswick place, went through an open gate. The gate was open, but they go up their driveway. Again, they were going to paint on her things, and the young kids that were doing the work said, well, we probably shouldn't paint on it. So they placed one of these in the ground as well on their private property. She wanted to mention that. I didn't talk to anybody else. So I can understand putting the markers in public food fairs and stuff like that. People understand it, but when they come onto our property unannounced, stay for 2 hours, waiting, it's there's one of those. I believe it or not, I'm actually for this project. That was kind of my time limit. So, I'm actually for this project, believe it or not. I think it's important, but we're not in the district, which is fine. And the district is clear, and your sphere of influence is very clear, so I don't understand why they would come on our property to do all the light construction, still construction.
Right.
And so my wife did call the office and asked, and she was told that no one had any idea this was happening.
And I
Yeah.
get the gist of
Yeah.
of your comments, and I appreciate you trying to bring it to our attention.
Yes,
To direct you, I mean, you don't need to comment, it's not on the agenda tonight, but.
just by way of explanation, and I will ask to assist.
Contrary to our direction as far
Right.
as being on private property.
Do you, can you tell me, if you don't mind, Madam
Yeah,
President, do you recall the approximate date when they first?
It was probably 4 weeks ago, I want to say, because after your last, so I came to, I didn't come to your last meeting.
Right.
Last week. I couldn't make
In
it.
the
last week. I was gonna come
October
last,
meeting.
yeah, and it was, I came right when you did, the lady was sitting here, she explained the contract.
Right.
And literally like 3 days later, I'm like, you guys must have just approved, you guys have approved the payment.
10 to 6, we're just pulling away. We're along the base, flat little space.
Can I ask that who's ever online mute, please? Can you make sure who's ever running the Zoom over there that everybody's muted except for us? Thank you. So I've had this discussion with our general manager. We're going to have it again. You know, they are not to be on private property without prior permission.
They want to at least, I mean,
I understand. So again, we'll take care of it. And I apologize. That's certainly not the intent of this one. To be on private land without permission. I understand that.
Madam President, I just wanted to point out, as soon as we knew that was taking place, we contacted Stantec. And after that time, it's my understanding that no private property was accessed without getting permission beforehand.
But it still shouldn't happen.
Right.
So we have to take responsibility. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We will make sure, either there's no request if there is a need in the future, or that they remain in public right away. So please let us know.
I don't know how we're gonna know. Someone hadn't been there.
Right, I understand. Thank you. Is there any other member of the public who wants to address us on that? Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move on to item 6, the administrative agenda. All matters under constituted consent agenda. Motion for approval and Let me do this when you're
I'll
speaking.
move item A, 6A and B.
Madam President, I just have one slight correction to the invoice total. It's the CSDA. It's listed on the agenda as 1,025. That's item 7. It should be actually 1,102.
1,102.
Yes.
Okay, let me make that change. Thank you for pointing it out. But very sorry. Discussion.
Well, I wasn't at the October 13th meeting, so I have this.
And do we need to do a roll call?
Yes, because money is involved. We
Okay.
certainly do. President Palmer,
Aye.
Vice President Farah. Mike, Director Army.
Aye.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director O'Neill.
He said, no, he's on the screen.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
Good. Thank you. The motion
Okay,
passes.
thank you. Motion passes. Okay, and we'll move on to item 7A, District Council update on states and housing bills 9 and 10, taking effect January 1st. Ross? Ross? That's your cue.
Okay, thank you. I can hear you now. I sent out a memorandum to the board.
Yeah, turn that up. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, we'll try that again. I did send out a memorandum to the board that summarizes SB 9 and SB 10 and the potential impacts on the district. I think the short version is that it's not likely to have much of an impact either of the bills, and it's due to the location of Los Olivos being outside of designated urban areas based on a census designation and definition, or outside of an urban cluster. Based on historical information collected through the last two census that I reviewed in preparing the memoranda, the likelihood that Los Olivos would be included as an urban area or an urban cluster is probably very low. And that designation is kind of a core trigger for the application of either SB 9 or SB 10. Just for the board members' edification, and for any members of the public who are not familiar with them, and why would you be? SB 9 was a bill that was passed and signed by the governor that made it easier than it already was for existing property owners to basically increase the density on their property in a single family residential zone. Typically, single family residential zone, you think of a family of a certain number of folks, but one main structure, one group of people living together on a property of a certain minimum lot size, sometimes 7,500 square feet, sometimes 10,000 square feet, depending upon the zone created by the local agency, whether that be a city or a county or some other entity. Before SB 9 came along, the state legislature and the governor had already relaxed certain restrictions that local agencies have a tendency to place on the development of single family residential zones. Put another way, the state mandated that local agencies provide or not stand in the way of, or what's called ministerially approve, the conversion or building of parts of the structure on the property, or building new structures in order to accommodate what are called accessory dwelling units, sometimes called granny flats, sometimes called mother-in-law quarters, sometimes called various versions of those. But essentially, it allows for part of the structure or a new structure to be erected that moves away from that single family characteristic and now has potential for multiple families to live on what used to be a single family residential zone. So that had been enacted previously, and SB 9 goes further in relaxing or requiring ministerial approval by local agencies in order to from the legislature's position and stated legislative policy goal of helping to ease the housing crisis. But the takeaway is it makes it a lot easier to increase the density on a single residential family zone property by allowing for or requiring the local agencies that would normally provide approvals or insert restrictions on how those properties can be developed to make that easier. And one of those ways is by a lot split. Normally there is more that is involved when you're looking at splitting a single family residential lot. And I won't go into it, and it varies from local jurisdiction to local jurisdiction, but this SB 9 included provisions that allowed for and required ministerial approval of lot splits as long as certain minimum standards are adhered to. The structure can't be smaller than 800 square feet, and the lot split can't result in minimum lot sizes of a certain size that it's not really terribly important for our discussion tonight. But essentially, it allows for a division of a single family residential lot into two, and then allows for the increased density by constructing these auxiliary dwelling units or junior auxiliary dwelling units, which are still attached to the main structure, but and other characteristics are basically the same as an ADU. All with the purpose of increasing the amount of housing that is available. But as I mentioned at the beginning of my report, SB 9 and SB 10 both are looking at requiring a trigger of the property being either in a city, which is included in one of these urban zones or urban clusters, or the property itself is, if it's in an unincorporated area like Los Olivos, then it has to be wholly within one of these census designated zones. And that does not appear to be, that is not the case now for the properties in Los Olivos, and it does not appear likely that that will be the case once the census completes its analysis and releases the data on what those urban zones will be based on the 2020 decennial census. SB 10 is a little bit different, but it has the same goal based upon the analysis by the legislature. And what it does is it allows for upzoning, which is to say it changes the zone from single family residency to multifamily, or whatever it may happen to be based on the property and based on the local jurisdiction. But the end result is it looks to increase the density, how many people and how many structures can be on a property. But again, the primary trigger is that the properties either have to be in an incorporated community, incorporated city that falls within one of these urban zones or urban clusters, or if it's in an unincorporated community, then a parcel itself needs to be in one of those zones or clusters. So that's the overall summary. It's a high level approach to it. But that essentially is what SB 9 and SB 10 do. So the good news for the district moving forward is that the impacts from SB 9 and SB 10 likely are going to be minimal at best. So it does not appear that there will be needed to be taken into account the prospect of significantly increased density, any more lot splits, or increased junior ADUs or ADUs. That being said, let's remember that these SB 9 and 10 followed prior legislative efforts, which were actually passed in 2019 and effective at the beginning of 2020, that already forced local jurisdictions to make it easier to implement ADUs and JADUs. So we are in a certain, we are in a different position than where we were, say, 5 years ago, but the impacts directly from 9 or 10 are likely not going to be a huge detriment to the district's efforts with respect to the wastewater treatment project.
Okay, thank you for that, Ross. Can you hear us any better?
Speak loudly, and I'll move this closer to you also.
So we'll I'll open it up to the board.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for that report, and that's better news than what I feared. My question has to do with, I think I know the answer to this, but one of the concerns I have is that we're about to spend a significant amount of time on a collection and treatment system that's going to have a given capacity, and you just don't make capacity out of thin air. So if there were lot splits or any developments in Los Olivos, now that a district is formed, approval of that by any entity is subject to a can and will serve by the district. Is that, am I right on that? Being that the district is formed and when a municipal system is in place, that someone would have to connect, and that's subject to a can and will serve?
Right. That was one of the conditions for the creation of the district initially, that once it's in, new developments have to connect, existing developments need to connect.
So, and the reason for my question is because then no one can develop us out of our overcapacity without our ability to be able to expand our capacity or otherwise. In other words, the development cannot be thrust upon us and force the balance of the community to pay for increased capacity. And so,
Correct. And the ability of infrastructure, and specifically wastewater was one of the issues that was called out, is one of the few areas where there can be some local oversight that may impede the development for that very reason. If you don't have the infrastructure to deal with the removal of the waste product, that's a problem. I think that's an important point to note. I'm looking for specifically. And yeah, there was a provision regarding wastewater. This is an SB 9. And for residential units connected to an on-site wastewater treatment system, the local agency may require a percolation test completed within the last 5 years, or if the percolation test has been recertified within the last 10 years. So there is some type of oversight, additional oversight that will be required with respect specifically to wastewater. I think one other thing I'll add that may be useful while the board considers additional questions is our understanding is that there is already a lawsuit that is challenging the implementation of SB 10. And we are also aware that it is very likely that there will be a lawsuit filed to challenge SB 9. So an initial provision or an initial goal of those would be to stop the implementation of those two laws on January 1st, 2022, most likely an injunction to put everything on hold while the case works its way through. Obviously, when you're looking at developing a project on a long-term basis, as the board has been considering and working on and will continue to work on, a delay of 6 months or 9 months is not a lot to bank on, but it at least shows that there is a lot of concern and focus on this, and it may produce a reality that is very different than the one that the board and other local agencies are faced with, at least at this point.
thank you, Mr. Trudell. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay, Director Army.
Hey, Ross, I just wanted a quick question, just to clarify something. We're being a special problems area that we are. Does that override anything right now on SB 9 and SB 10 as far as, because you can't even build a granny flat on your property anymore without, approval. So how would that affect it?
How that's going to be implemented specifically with the special problems area, that's a designation that was made by the county. So ultimately the county is going to have to be the one that parses through the impacts of SB 9 and 10 and in a special problems area. There's nothing specific in either law that takes that designation into account. There are a lot of requirements that have to be made under the new government code sections that were added in SB 9 and 10. For example, the properties that are looking to be converted, they can't be prime farmland. They can't be zoned or designated for agricultural protection. They can't be wetlands. They can't be in a severe fire zone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So whether the county takes the position that a special problems area falls within one of those excluded areas or zones, it's going to be a county determination, but it's certainly something that it should be discussed at the county level for implementing within the Los Olivos community.
Thank you.
Could I just piggyback on that? Because I see in your analysis, there is under the SB 9 a wastewater clause that says for residential units connected to an on-site wastewater treatment system, the local agency may require a perk test completed within the last 5 years, or if it has been recertified within the last 10 years. Oh, did he? Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that. So that's kind of but to your point about EHS and the county, we do need to talk with them about it, because I'm mostly concerned about not so much after the system is done, but what we're required to design to from a capacity standpoint. But from what you're saying, it should be a non-issue. Yeah, anyway, sorry. Director Ross.
Yeah, quick question. So what is the process for us to find out about someone that's trying to get a granny flat put in? I know they're not supposed to, but I guess they go to the county for a building permit, and then is the county going to tell us about it, or how does that work?
In terms of the administrative process, that's what should happen. Whether that is actually happening, given the administrative status of the district, I don't know. I think the general managers might be in a better place to answer that, or even Vice President Fayram.
Well, I think that after our system is in place, any connection requires, you just can't go out and build something and connect to our system. And I presume that we could adopt ordinance and regulations that would even prohibit that. And it seems like that would be an illegal activity to just go in and connect without our permission. That's why you have Ken Wilson. So.
But in terms of before the system is actually put in?
Oh, before the system, well, I don't believe the EHS is allowing that without putting in a full investigation.
Well, one of the things.
But I think it still has to meet zoning because SB 9 and SB 10 isn't adopted yet, so you still have to meet zoning. So you can have an ADU on certain parcel sizes if you meet the zoning requirement, and there might be some of that in the district. Not a lot that I can think of, but that could happen, but they would still need to meet the requirements.
But as far as us finding out about it, that's my question. Are they, after we have everything in place, it has to come directly to us to ask for connection, right?
Well, I think we need to establish when we get up and running with the county that before they issue a permit that connects to our system, they have to have a Ken Wilson circle letter from us, because there are connection fees, and with any other side, whether you have water or any other, school fees, all of that, they need to get approval from the various districts, so they would need that.
Perhaps, like any other comments or questions, Director O'Neill? Anything? I think, to that point, the lamp should address this, right?
And there
So
is-
I know the county's working on that,
Yes.
so I think whenever we see that, or that's a question we need to ask them, is like, how are they factoring this in or planning for that?
Right.
Because that's where it would be, because county's enforcement, we don't have, that's their job.
Madam President, I would also suggest it would be worthwhile talking to Ken Planning as well and see just how they are communicating with applicants as they may choose to come in.
Yeah, I think for now we have a top line answer that we were looking for, right? Are we subject to it? And based on the urban center and proximity to transit, we're not, but I think we do need to go to the county, EHS, and see how they plan to address it in the land. Because again, my concern is that we're put in a situation where we have to design to a bigger capacity at this point, rather than worrying about service. I know that's our concern, but that's why we asked for this opinion about the legislation, because we need to know what we're headed into.
And I was just going to say that after the first of the year, I'll probably be in a position to help with that.
Right. Oh, sorry, Brian. I thought you did the hand motion thing. Did you want to say something?
Just two things before Director O'Neill pops in. First, he's attending as a member of the public, so he's not taking part in any of the discussion as a board member. So if you're going to take any comments from Director O'Neill, it'd be part of a general public comment on the item. So I'll just note for the record that he is participating remotely. He's outside the jurisdiction, the physical jurisdiction of the board, and the board is operating under the normal Brown Act rules. So he's just here as a member of the public And second, in the chat, Ms. Scott asked to make a public comment on this item. I believe that references this report, but I believe she was logging on just as public comment was either wrapping up or had just recently wrapped up. So she may have, oh, I'm sorry, she says, yes, it is as to this item. So just letting the board president know.
Thank you. Okay, well then, is there any other discussion amongst the board members present here? Okay, then I'll go ahead and open the public comment on the item and well, Mr. O'Neill, we'll start with you, and then Anna Marie will go to you after Brian.
I'm sorry, there was background noise. I wanted to voice my opinion on the administrative process from the county, overseeing if there was any type of new wastewater system, granny flats and all that stuff. That is going to be superseded by the LAMP. There'll be higher restrictions on just the percolation test, as the LAMP is written right now for the special project districts. And I also believe that that the board was working with. Can I hear me?
Sort of. Your connection is unstable. Someone's is.
All right. Basically, it's covered in the LAMP, and the revised LAMP should be include the administrative process for us to know that information. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Anna Maria, are you? It looks like you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes, I am. Thank you, commissioners. I just wanted to point out regarding SB 9 and SB 10. These are just two of the housing, acts that were passed by the legislature this year. We are going to see more passed, and it will act. And Mr. Ross, or excuse me, Trindle is actually nodding, because we have a tremendous housing shortage. And in Los Olivos, we have a number of jobs, but without the housing to support those workers in the immediate area. So I don't think that you can actually use just this analysis moving forward to say, oh, well, our wastewater treatment facility is only going to be able to service 400 homes plus, Los Olivos downtown. I think you need to actually look at a far greater number because of the desirability of Los Olivos, the general plan, and the fact that we are actually going to be revising the requirements as noted on, it was on page 49F. It was on the last portion of the sentence, or excuse me, of the paragraph, basically saying that the census has a federal rule making process underway to update the criteria for the classifications for Los Olivos. So I don't know that we also have actually asked the county for an analysis, because the county often, like the city of Santa Barbara, will make its own interpretations, and your interpretation may not actually align with theirs. So I just want to put that out, as well as one final thing, which is development agreements. Any property owner can go to the county and ask for a development agreement to increase the density on their property. And they will, because of all of the housing housing issues that we have right now, they will most likely grant it. So, I think that this analysis, gives you just a little bit of background about what is possible. I don't believe that it's actually an analysis that is going to flesh out at the county level. And as we move forward, especially with this absolute need for housing, because we are going to see more bills, and these bills will increase development and density in areas like Los Olivos. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any other public comment on this item? Folks are here. Kelly?
Is there any chance that you getting a petition signed by a majority of the residents of Los Olivos that has any benefit in preventing further development? I mean, ruining the home that I've loved for the past 25 years because we've now solved this problem, it'll be devastating. And I don't think I'm the only one that feels that way. So that's what I'm saying. If there's a benefit for getting a petition, call me. And if I walk around, get me one.
Thanks, Kelly. Anybody else? Okay, so it sounds like, well, first of all, Ross, thanks for preparing that. I do think we have some follow-up to do with the county, Bob, both EHS and maybe contact, we should contact Supervisor Hartman's office to tell her what we're looking at and see if there's any other hoops we should be running at the county. Have her make sure she's aware that it's on our radar and ask for her assistance and guidance. If there are any other county entities we should check in with. All right, and then I'm seeing more chats. I just want to make sure we're staying current. We're good? Okay. Awesome. All right, just checking. Okay, anything else? So this was just an information item. There's no action other than, I think, does any, do any other board members have suggestions or guidance to?
No, I would just say,
Pursuing it.
Madam President, that I think I'm sure our council, Mr. Trendle, will, if there are additional issues that come up to speed, they'll bring them to our attention if we don't hear them ourselves. Very helpful, good discussion to have.
Okay, thank you all.
So we do have an action on the county level.
Mhm. I see Bob nodding.
Yes.
Okay, then we'll move on to item 7B, approval of action plan resulting from the November 3rd board workshop.
Yes, Madam President, as you recall, the board conducted the workshop on November 3rd. The reason for the workshop was to give the board an opportunity to review several key elements of the project underway, including design, cost, budget, and to make sure that the effort is remaining focused as you go through the septic to sewer project. At the conclusion of your discussion, there were a number of key points made. First of all, that would serve as a basis for an action plan. And I also took input following the meeting, individual comments, and tried to wrap that up in this memo. The memo that you have, and I'll just go over those key points for folks that may not have a copy of the agenda. The first key point is to retain a consultant to review effluent discharge options. Engineer to the district is to evaluate, review, and present outcomes and recommendations to the board. Number 2 was to place further work on GSI water solutions on a proposed injection facility study on hold until a review of the effluent discharge options is complete. The reason for the hold is based on the fact that the completion of the injection feasibility study, the study itself was estimated to cost it in the neighborhood of $200,000. In addition to that, the well drilling that would need to take place to determine how an injection program would impact the groundwater. Those well drillings are considered to be quite high, and the price range for those range between $200,000 and $800,000, depending on the type of well that is in fact being drilled. The other issue that was brought forward is that GSI had furnished a high level cost estimate for the entire project as it relates to injection. And that high level estimate ranged between 5.3 and $6 million. So consequently, the board wanted to evaluate what the other effluent discharge options are available to make sure that the project moves forward with the best of those options. Number 3 was to delay the completion of the preliminary design. That's the Stantec work beyond the 30% design level until the next fiscal year. This was a means of saving approximately $80,000. The net impact is simply that it would delay the last element of the preliminary design into next year, where it could be more brought in under the projected budget. I will note that even at 30% design, that's pretty significant. The timing for that would be about April. With that, you would be expected to get an outline, a layout of the treatment plant and the collection system, and a pretty good cost estimate of what that project will cost. So getting to the next level, which is the 60% level, is actually more or less just the finishing touch. The board also expressed an interest to retain an assessment engineer to develop a financial plan. And this financial plan would consider project costs, outside funding, and develop a estimated assessment share as a result, so that you would actually have the basis of a financial plan. That could be improved, obviously, as the process goes along with other grant funding. Focus and continue to focus efforts on an aggressive strategy to seek and pursue additional grant funding. That is considered very important by the board in terms of getting a project that is affordable for the entire community. Just within the last few weeks, the board retained the additional services of M&S to do the grant seeking for us. And a little bit later tonight, we'll hear more specifically from M&S relative to the initial progress that's being made in that regard. To develop a full and accurate schedule that would include prioritize critical path, budget, and date-specific timeframes. Number 7, delay initiation on the environmental work until the preliminary project design is complete and the preferred site is identified. And the reason that this is important is that before you can proceed with an environmental review, you really have to have a project in mind. And what a project is a site or alternative sites identified, as well as a specific project design that you can then test from an environmental point of view. And then number 8, Stantec to review complete a review of sites. The sites contained in the UPC siting study should serve as a base, but Stantec should not be limited to the sites contained in that report. And I should say they're aware of that. They're working on that site review as we speak. And their intent, and I was going to cover this a little later tonight, but their intent is to come forward with the first set of recommendations along with the basis of design. And you should be seeing that first basis of design in the report that they'll provide you for review next month. In addition to these points, I'll stop for a moment and answer any questions, but then we've also got a couple of charts that I distributed earlier today that we'll bring up on the screen here if we could, and they represent the action plan that the board had requested. First of all, I'll respond to any questions that you have regarding these 8 points, and then we'll continue with the review of the charts.
Okay. Any questions from directors? I see
I have-
Director Ross.
I have a lot of questions. First point is, not all the board agreed to this stuff.
Right,
So-
it's true.
So let's make that clear. So the main thing I'm very intent on is, I think we made a commitment to Stantec last month to do the work. Not part of the work, but the whole thing. And we were telling them they didn't have much of a schedule to work with and we wanted them to go really fast. I don't know if they hired more people, but for us to pull out $80,000, that doesn't seem right to me. And I would like to understand any reasoning why we have to do that.
Well, as I mentioned, it was a means of, first of all, as I stated, each of the work that Stantec is completing is being done in phases. The first phase is the basis of design, and that will be done within the next month. And they will then, upon a review of that basis of design and board and district comments, they will then begin the 30% design. It's kind of like a separate work item. So it's not as if they're hiring people now that will be working on it then. That 30% design will be completed probably early next spring. And once that is done, you would normally proceed with the final 60%. The only thought about that was trying to find a way of, the budget was struggling, trying to find a way to balance that off with spreading the actual cost to the district for the completion of the Stantec work over 2 fiscal years. And it may be, in fact, more affordable that way. Certainly that's a board's decision, and it's a work study session. So collectively, what I did with this is took what I understood to be the general comments of the board, and certainly this is the opportunity to solidify that. And if the board wants to go differently, that's certainly okay.
Okay, so in my opinion, if you're going to do something like this, you would have a schedule of costs to demonstrate that we just can't afford the 80K or 80K in this fiscal year. And I haven't seen that. I don't know that what does exist. I see you put down 60K for reviewing the effluent discharge options. I think that's too high. You put down 30K for the initial financial model. I think that's too high. So I'm just wondering what the justification is for us to go back on what we committed to last month.
And certainly you hit on my rationale for the effluent discharge review. Obviously, we won't know that in the actual cost of that until we get an engineer retained and the ability to understand what those costs are. But it was my intent. I thought that was a reasonable estimate. And so that's why I provided it. The assessment engineer, it certainly could cost less, but again, that is something we don't know at this point. So it was just an option to try and create some flexibility in the budget.
Yeah, I don't I don't think flexibility in the budget justifies us changing what we commit to last month. So that's just my take.
I think what we committed to do is that we were gonna do the 60%. I think it's a question of the timing. And as we started this process, even back in August, we were talking about getting the grant. We wanted to have Stantec have, 30% plans even done by the first of the year, and that's not gonna happen. I knew it wasn't gonna happen, but, it had to play out that way. And I think it's logical to take the step. This is going to hit all of us in the pocketbook for the rest of our lives, or as long as we live here, so it needs to be done right. And I am not in a hurry to do this fast. Fast, good, and cheap. Those are your three options. If we're gonna cut one out, for me, it's gonna be fast, because I want it good and cheap. And so when we look at, the balancing and kind of an issue that I kind of had concern about, but I'm prepared to support it and do it, is the assessment engineer at this stage. But to put together the financial outview, I think has value. So you start building up all these costs, and there's only so much, that I think we have capacity to do. And so waiting for another round of our funding, as limited as it is, would help us do that. So I think it's a good move myself, because getting the 60% plans done this fiscal year doesn't get us any closer to actually building the project. So why rush it? Because it's not going to make a difference. So that's just my view on that. And while I mentioned the assessment engineer, and we'll just see what the scope and the price is that you bring back to our board. But I'm envisioning a fairly limited scope, as you talk. We're not setting up an assessment vote, or we're trying to put the model together so that we can plug in costs and know who's set up the equity issue of who's going to be paying what. And then, of course, none of that or all of that has to wait on the grant funding, because this community is going to need grant funding support to put in a project of this expense. So, like I said, I'm concerned about taking that step, but I'm going to support it, because I think the value of that financial plan is probably something that we need more than the 60% plans for Stantec.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as deferring. We're not doing the work. We're simply deferring it until the next fiscal year, or until we have better visibility at the end of this one, based on these other items that we have capacity to get them started on. So I understand. I mean, that is a change from where we were earlier, but these new numbers, I think, anyway.
But
Can I just point of order? Do you have additional comments, Brad, or do you want to have a
Well, I have
conversation?
additional questions. So looking at this list, it says we're delaying environmental work. It says we're postponing any GSI stuff. So why is it all of a sudden we don't have enough money to pay for Stantec? I don't see any spreadsheet or any indication of what the costs are and why we have to do this. I'd like to see the numbers.
Well, we could go back and look at the information that was provided during the last, it depends obviously on the choices of the board. But as I pointed out in the last meeting, at that time, made you aware that there was a significant increase in the Stantec cost that went through from an initial proposed amount of 155,000 to roughly 266,000 plus the siting study. And that eats up a significant amount of the remaining dollars you had for professional dollars. And then on top of that, we were talking about at the time the heavy cost of pursuing injection. And so it was a combination of those factors that were really putting the budget almost in a deficit position. So if you want to go back to what we were looking at,
at our last meeting.
And can I say while you're doing that, I mean, Brad, I hear you, but what the whole reason we had that workshop was to get our arms around where we were with work and the additional estimates. It's work that needs to be done. But those, you know, we have increased costs and the injection numbers are coming back off the chart. So we had that workshop, do a timeout and assess where we are. And then these things, these actions are what came out of that.
And Madam President, these things kind of incrementally caught up with us. Remember, we had the discussion about doing phase one design only. We all agreed we can't do that.
Right.
We would box up. So we took the step, which wasn't planned, to say, no, we have to design the entire district. Otherwise, we're really going to box. That was a huge, I think that's what Mr. Perot was reflecting about the increase.
Right.
And so, yeah, so we're going to trade off doing that. Absolutely, we have to do that. That was a good decision. It's going to come as a cost of something else because it increases the, we can't defer, we were going to defer the design of the balance of the district and we decided we couldn't do that. So now what we're going to have to defer is the 60% plan.
But we can get grants on the 30% design.
And we might get grants to complete the 60 and 100, which will be discussed here shortly.
Right, because that's not, I know we're a little bit all over, but 30%, to be clear for the public, too, 30%, at least we've been told, is enough to get us in the game for grants. So 60%, we have to get there eventually in order to build the thing, but to get into the grant making game, we need a 30% design. So that's, again, why we.
And with the 30% design, you can narrow your budgets down to get it pretty realistic of what it's gonna really cost before we go farther.
Okay, so let's look at the,
There it is.
let's look at the column to the right, the year end, where do we stand or what's the total cost? So at the bottom of the column to the right, it says we're short $218,000. But if you go up to the GSI, you'll see that there's $217,000 that we're not going to spend. So that pretty much evens it out. And then if you look at the preliminary environmental cost, we're saying we're going to defer that until we get more information. So there's 65 to the plus. And so it looks to me like we, even giving Stantec all the money that we promised them last month, we still have 65,000 more than we have available. So I just don't understand why Stantec has to take a cut.
And it is not Stantec taking a cut. It is Stantec, it's just trying to stretch.
Well, yeah, but the reality is when you're a small business and you're trying to do a job and you have a big gap where you're not doing any work, the product isn't good. That's why I want to keep them going so they can end up with a 60% design that's really good. So that's where I come in.
And of course, this is my opinion as a professional. I think you've got some other things that you want to get accomplished during this same year, and that is one area that I think is very critical is getting the review of the different effluent discharge options so that you have all three of them. And then you can make a final determination at the end that hopefully should all come together about the same time we're getting 30% done. And then the board will be in a position to make a decision how to proceed with the entire project, whether that's going to be injection and whether that's going to be some other method, including percolation or potentially creek discharge. So the intent was to try and create the flexibility to allow all of that work to take place. And yes, ultimately you're deferring slightly the final work to be done by Stantec. But my belief is that they themselves would not find this objectionable.
I'd point out Stantec is far from a small company.
Yeah.
And also that I still go back, remember, they originally were only gonna do the downtown core, we expanded it to the whole district. So we in fact did exactly that, gave them more work.
So as I've said, ultimately it is a board's decision on these key points and ultimately the action plan. That is for the board to decide.
So the 65K is not enough to cover the assessment of the effluent options as well as getting the model initiated. You can't do it for 65K.
That's my understanding is yes, that, using the remaining $80,000 plus what, if you look again at what is anticipated, I think if you, number one, take the EIR, you're not going to take the EIR before you need to in any event.
You don't have a project to study it.
You have to have a project to study it. And so between the two, between doing the EIR when it is necessary to have it done, when you have a project, and doing the and just deferring the final step in Stantec would provide you sufficient money for, number one, completing, as I've said, the effluent discharge review, the assessment amount, and then, there still is likely to be other things that are going to come up during this period that we'll need to pay attention to, whether that is going ahead with drilling a monitoring well, just to know more about what is underneath the groundwater. That just, to me, provides a good, prudent budget approach.
Any other questions or that you want to, I think the other thing to do is have a conversation with Bob, but I think where we're headed is you need to bring back, well, you need, I don't know, that it just says approve of action plan.
I
So,
submitted a chart to you earlier today and
right,
like your input on that as well.
right. But what I'm hearing, and you can, is that we need a revised budget that shows all of this, not just a standalone and a
Right.
timeline, but where it fits in the overall budget for the rest of the fiscal year and what's getting deferred to this budget.
I have one question, Bob. Did you talk to Stantec and talk to them about possibly base funding this deal for them so they're aware of it?
They've been following this discussion. I think, in fact, Autumn was here last meeting.
Okay, so that's all. I mean, as long as they're aware of it, they still want to proceed, it shouldn't be an issue, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Anything else? Brad, from you? Director Army? Director Fair. I think, let me just add a couple of notes, but I think we talked about the 30%. And the environmental, I think the only thing I had on the environmental is, of course, we're going to delay it, but, and I don't even know when we need to identify it though. So we've got, when we're ready to pull the trigger on moving forward with it, we've got that consultant identified. So I'm not sure where that fits in. Or if that's after the 30% design from an expenditure standpoint, but
Most-
not waiting
right.
until.
There's a request in chat from Paul Rohr, when the public comment on this item.
Well, let's go ahead and to take public comment then before we go to direction or any more discussion of directions of general manager. So, Paul, do you have a comment on the action plan? for the key points from our workshop?
Yeah, I was just a little concerned. I wanted to drill in a little bit on the change from an injection system, because it seemed like that was pretty sort of certain before, right? And now it's become uncertain. So I'd like to talk about, I mean, what that means. It would seem like it might mean if you're doing percolation that it requires a larger site. If you're thinking of doing it as a surface outflow, then I would imagine it goes down Alamo Pintado Creek. Is it possible to talk about any of these sort of effects that would be different, right? Because I think when we talked about it before, we described it as a package system that would do injection straight down, and you were looking for as small as a half an acre site. So this seems a little bit different. I'm sorry about the glare. I'm speaking from a different spot. But this seems a little different from what you discussed before. And I was wondering if there were some answers about that, right? Like, are you thinking about percolation? I mean, just it was mentioned tonight. I mean, what does that do with size? Are you thinking about outflow in Alamo Pintado, and what does that mean in the creek bed? So that's what I'd like to hear a discussion of as part of this, because it seems like you're moving in a direction that was very different from what was previously discussed, which could be good or bad. I just wanted to hear about it.
Why don't you go ahead, Bob?
Yeah, Mr. Rohr, it is a bit of a change. I think, as you may know, a couple of meetings ago, I think it was the 1013 meeting, we received the high planning estimate for just injection. That has nothing to do with the rest of the project. And the level of that cost was fairly significant. I mean, we're looking at between $5 and $6 million for the entire project. Obviously, that could still be phased if the board chooses to do it. But I think the board wanted to be sure that they had the option and that they were looking at all of the options that were available to them. And then based on the review of those options, based on where we sit at that time, and being able to know a little bit more about grant opportunities that are maybe available to them, I then think they would be in a better position to make a determination on finally what that project should be. You know, you've raised a couple of good points. You know, percolation, yes, requires usually a much larger site. But we won't know that until we go through the evaluation of those options. And the creek has its own set of issues associated with it. But at least the evaluation will bring all that information forward and allow the board to make a decision.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, I think just to give you 30 seconds on this from my perspective, it's clear that yes, the injection costs are high, and we want to make sure, not just on the injection, but on any effluent disposal option, that we're looking at the whole life cycle, if you will, from permitting to construction to operation to transport, right? Because you have to operate the thing, you've got to transport waste off site, and there's costs associated with that. So all of a sudden, we just want to make sure that we do our due diligence on the trade-offs of, you know, permitting, environmental, community, and financial before we make a decision and a recommendation. So that's where that came from. So thank you. Any other members of the public who have a comment on this portion of the agenda? Oh, I see Director O'Neill. Yes.
Excuse me, that's Mr. O'Neill tonight.
Go ahead, Brian.
All right. I want to just acknowledge Mr. Rohr's comment out there and support what he's asking for. One of my largest concerns as I followed this project is when an engineering or a consultant comes in and brings a new member to to the stage. Stantec has done that. So that's one issue that I have. The next issue is that during the project development aspect of this whole concept, there was a feasibility study that was performed that recognized and evaluated certain options that were brought up by Stantec last week, which was pretty much of a concern also. Acknowledging the impossibility, literally, of discharging to the creek. Also the struggles that we have had with bringing the effluent into Santa Ynez or into Solvang. The cost loss benefit of us having to increase the capacity of the Solvang facility with each of those options was considered a non-starter. I believe it would be in this board's best interest to communicate to Stantec the historical information and put them in the right direction, not to evaluate these things or to evaluate them as we already have. Okay. And final concern I have with following this project, and it was a little bit disturbing listening to the workshop last week, was Stantec's design and intent to put it into the potable water, the current potable water aquifer. Nowhere have we even, that I'm aware of, that the board has interacted with the state or the county to actually drill into that aquifer. First off, it's my opinion that we would never get approval to discharge into the viable aquifer. And that would negate everything here. And the board's project description was reuse into the shallower aquifer that were tainted. And if those concerns are still on the table, as Mr. Rohrak questioned, we would be on a small footprint and a significant reduction in costs. The depth of drilling, the permitting and impacts associated with going into the deep aquifer, and the missing out of grants on flushing the tainted aquifer. So to wind this up, my suggestion to the board is to bring Stantec up to date with their new project manager on what we've asked them to do based on existing documentation, as in the feasibility study and in the project description, as we've worked with the water board and the county in the past. So thank you very much. No response from the board required.
President, if I could, just to make sure and clarify which consultant that Brian's referring to. It was actually GSI's consultant, Water Solutions, that were making the comments that he's referencing in the last meeting.
My content was actually for the Stantec folks also.
Carl.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Any other public comment on this? Your hand's still up. Okay. So based on the discussion, what directions do we want to give the general manager? I mean, I'm seeing your thought.
Yeah, Madam President, I think what we have here is pretty much what we talked about at our workshop. I think this is not set in stone, and at a future meeting when we get new information, this could change, just as we change to get to this point as well. I mean, we're tackling a large project here, and I think what this does is tries to prioritize you know, the work that we're doing and manage it within our budget. And if the board approves it tonight, which I'm prepared to make a motion on when the time's right, it would be with the understanding that, you know, the board could modify and change this in the future. It doesn't bind us to And if we decide we want to accelerate Stantec because we get a grant all of a sudden, I'm all for it. If something changes where, whatever it is, we would then, do that. So I think there's some things in here that still give me a little bit of concern that I talked about earlier, but I think it captures what we talked about, and I'm prepared to support.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm not prepared to support it until I think there's an action for the general manager to put together the financials in a more concise and understandable way. So what kind of something we should vote on this until we go.
Madam Chair, that's actually a fair enough comment that there's nothing pressing us to do this tonight. If we were to have the financial backup, this could come back in December. I'll look to Mr. Perot, and we can approve it with that information. That's a fair enough question or comment.
And I tend to agree. I want to see it in the context of essentially a revised budget and what happens. Where does this take us till the end of 22 and then into the 22, 23. So having said that, is there anything that's going to hold you up between now and December
In revising.
in not having action on these? I mean, you're already moving Stantec to 30% design or the basis of design. They're already working on the siting study. We budgeted for the grant work that's underway. We've already approved moving forward with the assessment engineer, I believe.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, I'm not going to wait. any
So
longer.
it's really, I just want to make sure that if we want it, because I agree, I feel more comfortable seeing it this is great, the timeline, but it needs to be in the context of the overall budget and where we are, what our spend is, what we're proposing for the rest of the year, and then what's getting deferred into the following fiscal year. But not at the risk of not accomplishing the mission critical on the design of the site. Okay.
So is looking for a consultant to review the effluent discharges, is that going to move forward?
Is I'm basically understanding that these key points are generally acceptable to the board, and I will continue along the work items as stated here, but I will return and review again with you in December in terms of the context of the budget. But the key elements that we talked about, the assessment engineer, the effluent review of the effluent discharge, all of that will move forward at this point. We're not going to wait till December for you to take further action on it.
So, okay, so just to be clear, so you're going to look for candidates to do this
Yes.
work, but you're not going to award any contracts until we have a meeting,
Right.
correct?
Yeah, yes, of course.
It would
That makes
it'd
sense.
have to come to us anyway.
Yes,
For both
it's-
the recommendations
yes.
for the contractor and the.
It's,
scope of work.
yes.
A good question. Okay, so no action is what I'm hearing.
Madam President, I see on this item, it is, there's an action item to give direction to the general manager. Maybe ask, Mr. Trindle, if it would be appropriate, I could make a motion that we direct the general manager to come back in December with the financial analysis that was discussed, with the board. Would that be appropriate, Mr. Trindle?
Yes.
Okay, I'll make a motion so moved, Madam President.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, first and second, any discussion? Do we have to do a roll call still?
Yes,
Okay.
I would still do it, especially with a
Just,
motion of
okay,
this
fine,
kind.
just,
Palmer,
yes,
Hayram,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
and Army. And we'll reflect it on the LSAPs. The motion passes.
and thanks for getting that turned around from the meeting last week, and good conversation. I think we're headed in that. Headed in a good direction. Okay, yeah. going. Let's see, item 7C, update on grant funding options and pursuit.
Just very briefly, because M&S grant writing group was authorized to proceed just a little over a week ago. We had an internal kickoff on Friday, and they are assigning a team specifically for us. And they're a very busy group. We've just hired 3 new grant writers, and they're operating out of a little bit further south in California, but they are very successful and prolific in what they do, as you've seen. And so I hope by next meeting to report that they updated their analysis on what's changed, what's new. One of the things we talked about in the kickoff meeting is that for sure, they're before December 31st, they're going to update our SRF loan application that's been submitted to the state. That includes, that's just a platform that allows us access to many different types of loans and forgivable loans, the term they use for the grants. And they're also following very closely the legislative act and state funds that we know are coming available, not in the time frame that we hope, but not far afield from it, with funding potentially in 2023. And then, of course, we have the new infrastructure bill. And so we don't know what that means. Often priorities given to shovel-ready projects, so we proceed as much as we can to represent progress as far as possible. But we're also going to rigorously pursue some additional planning grant funds, because that's usually lower hanging fruit, faster to obtain, and can fill in some of these gaps that are arising in funding for soft costs. So the bottom line is that at the next regular meeting, we hope to have much more information.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Any questions or comments from the
Just-
board?
Just a quick comment, and you may not know, Doug or staff, I just wondering, where are we with the 600+ thousand we're supposed to be trying to get from the county?
The application went forward. We received a response from the county just this last week. And it didn't, from the response, I've not had a chance to directly talk with the county, but it did not look as if those dollars, and I should point out, those dollars were identified for the groundwater management implementation of that program. And the indication was that the county did not, within the near term, have those kind of dollars available to them.
Well, that's, if I could, they came back and said, for the scope, we don't think that's in our jurisdiction, you should talk to the state. So that's how I read it. So I don't know who's handling the county, because I was going to bring this up. Because I think we need to go back and see what we are eligible for. If they're not going to pay for this, what else do they pay for through VHS? And if we need to meet with Joe Hartman again to get her digging up some other money, we need to do that. So I don't know if that's within the scope, or I kind of want to look at this holistically, right? Because we need to know what's available at the county as well as the state. So I think it warrants a conversation, because I'm not willing to accept a no. If we're going to figure out yes for what is how I look at it. So Doug, I was thinking, first of all, thanks for getting it kicked off, and perhaps we could have a conversation, because there's a few elements out there I've been working on that I just want to make sure we're looking at all the options.
We've been feeding some specifics to Greg Hawkins, and so we're not going to leave any stones unturned. Fine.
I just think it's worth going back to VHS and saying, okay, what do you have? and what is it for, and how do we make it a match? And then also go back to Supervisor Hartman, the same, and I know Megan Dietenhofer was here a couple weeks ago, and she offered to help, so we need to avail ourselves of that offer. So that's what. Anybody else?
So quick question, we have been thinking that maybe there are grants or monies available based on how we do the discharge of the effluent. So is someone looking into that? Is that, or do we already have the answers, or do we need to look into that more?
All along, we've leveraged that. And this is a recycling project for sure. It's, no matter what the disposition of the effluent is, meets the definition of recycling. So one of the other angles that I'm discussing with that group is we know there's some background nitrates that are flowing into our district from up gradient. And there is currently no program to deal with that. We know that some of those numbers exceed the MCLs. And so that may be some leverage to get the county to take more action or find funding, because that it's not even on, we're trying to put it on the radar, but it's not on the radar to work at figuring out that they have a term for that. It's looking for the non-point source causes of that contamination, and it's agriculturally based or animals or chemicals that would apply to crops, things like that.
Okay, so as far as our person that's going to evaluate the different discharge options of the effluent, they are not going to see any advantage financially as far as getting monies, grants, whatever, based on what they recommend. Are we pretty solid on that?
Yeah. We're looking at every angle. We're looking at the drought funding that's available, because this is a new source or a renewable source rather of water, potable water, because we have a desire to treat the water to a level where it can either be filtered in the ground or filtered before it goes into the ground. So we're looking at every angle to get money.
Anybody else? Okay, any public comment on the grant pursuit? I don't see any. Okay, all right, well, thank you for that, and we'll look for an update and hopefully applications in December. Okay, then we'll move to item 8, General Manager's report.
Yeah, a lot of things have already been covered. I just want to mention that Stan Tech is making progress. They are keeping on their original schedule. The basis of design, I expect that we'll probably receive the report within the next week or two. And it is likely that staff will take a look at it. And then we'll forward it to the board for your review. So that is moving on pretty much as we speak. Both Doug will begin working with me in developing the request for qualifications for the effluent. The engineer to determine or review the effluent discharges. I will take the lead with the assessment engineer. And so hopefully we'll move those along as quickly as we can. I just wanted to, again, we heard it during the public comment reference about some of the initial comments are communications with property owners. And we've been working very hard on that to try and resolve it. And we'll have email going out to all our stakeholders in the next day or two and making them aware if there are any issues that they encounter. Please, get back to us as soon as possible. I think that's about it. The Finance Committee meeting, I just want to mention, will need to take place a little earlier than anticipated. I'm looking at a date now of November 29th, I believe, which is a Monday. So I'll be contacting all of our vendors and making sure that they get their billings into us on time so that we can meet that. Other than that, the next meeting agenda will be, the next meeting will be focusing on, will be December 8th. And we are going to be going back to meeting in person. The city attorney has indicated he'll be with us at that point. We'll be discontinuing the Zoom participation unless the board wants to continue with some kind of hybrid method. But my recommendation is that we'll go back to totally in-person meetings, which will mean that the next meeting will be held here, the next general meeting, and it will not have a Zoom connection.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think we're all ready to be back in person. I think we discussed it. So I know you're moving forward with that. And then I guess the only other question was, you were going to determine if we were going to be here permanently.
Yes, I agree. Follow up on that. I'll begin those discussions next week with St. Mark's.
All right, any questions or comments for the general manager?
I have one. So the schedule that you put together, the action plan table of dates, it shows that the board is approving the Stantec reports. For the first one, the base of design, we have a total of 3 weeks between when the report's supposed to be done and we approve it. And you're mentioning you all want to look at it first before you give it to the board. On the second one, it's 4 weeks, the 30%. My request is, I would like to have it for at least a week. And with the idea being that I won't take a week looking at it, but I want you all to have a chance to put together a response to Stantec based on our feedback.
That's fine. That's not a problem.
And I would recommend that you put that detail in the schedule so we know what the expectations are for things moving on.
Will do.
Anybody else? Okay, well, with that, we're going to move into closed session, which is just the board. So the only thing we have after that is informational items, call for agenda in our next regular meeting. So if you want to stick around and come back to that, you're welcome. But otherwise, we're going to adjourn to closed session. So we're going to shut down the Zoom. Actually, Brian, we're using a separate Zoom connection just for the closed session. Thank you all for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Brian, I'll send it to you as well. Yeah, you can't, yeah, you're not, sorry. You're right.
Again, I'm going to shut down both sound and camera here. Brian, anybody want to talk to Brian? Brian's not going to be in the closed session. Right?
No, he's not.
You're on mute, Ryan.
Doug, can you guys call me when you guys get done? I want 2 things that I want to add to see if we can get on the agenda for next meeting.
Sure.
So just give me a call.
Not tonight, you mean?
Oh, afterwards.
After the closed session.
Or should I just stay on?
You can't, you're only a member of the public, so you can't
You
stay on.
can't
the
stay
public.
on, you're
You
banned.
can't, yeah, because you didn't,
We'll give you a phone call after the meeting.
yeah.
All right, yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah. Kabuki dance. Oh, okay. Yeah, I messed with the camera. Sorry, Doug.
No problem.
Being paranoid. Okay, so we have our council back on, council.
Yes, the board is reconvened from
Oh, you
closed
know what?
session.
I think, hang on.
Oh,
You're on, I turned the volume off on the computer too. So just-
oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, board returned to open session from closed session at 8:16 PM. There were two items on the agenda for closed session discussion. Item one was conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation under government code section 54956.9 subsection D2. Discussion was had with district counsel. There's no reportable action. Second item from closed session was public employee performance evaluation of the general manager. Your government code section 54957 subsection B1. General manager received feedback and there was discussion amongst the board. There's no reportable action on that either. That concludes the report out of closed session.
Thank you, council. Thank you, everyone. So item 10, informational items. Do we have any?
No.
No.
This time.
Call for agenda items. Gentlemen, anyone?
I have one.
Okay,
So my recommendation is from now on in our monthly meetings, we have a status of all of the actions for our matching funds, because I mean, this is really freaking me out. I want to make sure that when time comes that we can say, here is everything we promised and therefore give us our money. I just want to make sure that we focus on that and just keep pounding on it so we are ready when time comes. I don't want us to forget about it to the last minute. So I think every meeting, we need to review that very quickly to say, okay, are we making progress in all these areas, or is there something we're forgetting to do or whatever, just to make sure we're going to do everything that it says.
And for clarification, you're looking for those things that we're supposed to complete as a part of that grant.
Yeah,
several
Doug already
actions.
has the list,
Right.
so we just need to status it for every month, and I think we do.
and that's probably something you're updating internally anyway, aren't you, as we move through it?
Well, I reviewed it from time to time. I haven't actually started drafting the report yet, but making sure we have all the components. There's a few things they asked for that aren't currently under a contract to complete, but they're simple items that are much generic sections based on, that can be completed based on common sense and frequently used milestones and buzzwords.
Well, your request is noted, and I'll leave it to you guys to figure out how it comes back.
Yeah, you weren't here for this part, but we've all volunteered to help out with stuff. So if there's something that needs to be written or put together that I can help with, please let me know. But basically, every month we need to see % complete on all those things, just so we know whether it's a simple thing or not.
Yep.
If it has 0%, then I start losing sleep.
It's a simple thing to pull that list up. It's in the application and you can, there's like 12 items.
Yeah.
And
Great.
it makes me smile to hear you say I volunteer because there's actually a couple of tasks that you'd be perfectly suited to help with.
Okay.
Great.
So, but my point is, and we also said this earlier, is the rule is you can't wait until the day before.
Right.
And tell me, so if you want my help, I'm more than happy, but
I was gonna wait till
I'll let you,
Christmas Eve.
how about you guys work it out?
Yeah.
Thank you for volunteering and bringing that. Anything else on agenda items? Okay. Next regular meeting is December 8th here.
here.
No
At 6
Zoom.
o'clock. So I was gonna ask about the Zoom thing. So are we supposed to ask the public if there is a strong request for Zoom, or do we just say?
It's not required.
Well, they just
No.
call, used to, if they don't, can they call in or?
Offering a call-in or remote option is at the discretion of the board. The only time it's required is if the board elects to follow the remote meeting procedures under AB 361, which added new provisions to the Brown Act. In the absence of the board doing that, and you haven't done so yet, then there's no requirement that you offer it. If you want to, you can, but it's not required.
Right, I'm just trying to be sensitive to the public.
Well, I think we go back to in-person. If there's a demand, then we might reconsider it, but I think asking them, I'd rather have people come in person, like me personally, and getting back to normal. And
Well, then there's I see it at the county, there's a sense of empowerment and hiding back in the weeds and snipering when you can do it like that as opposed to standing here and doing it. That's just my opinion.
and we're
You
a small
want it-
enough community. It's not like you have to
And we're
drive
small
across town to get
communities,
here.
you know, the county is a big area and they're still doing it because some people live in Guadalupe and the meetings in Santa Barbara. This meeting is no more than a mile from anybody.
Right,
Yeah.
and we're also not the county, we're a small district, and obviously, I want you guys focused on the work
We've had
rather
a
than
technical challenge.
dealing with the technical. So if there's a reason in the future, or we're gonna have a special workshop, and we also wanna offer it as a one-off, happy to consider that, but I think we go back to it first.
One of the things I've thought about, and again, you may know more about several districts will have some kind of a means of televising their meetings. It's not a participatory program. It is more that those meetings are televised and people can access them from their own home. I don't know what, for instance, Santa Ynez Water District uses. Do they televise their
I
meetings
don't
at
know, we
all?
can find out, like the high school has, it's on YouTube, you can just log on to YouTube and watch it real time, so. But it
And I was
requires somebody recording it, and having decent audio, so
Right.
if we find we want to do that, we can, but if we're gonna do that, we might as well. Well, I see the differences, you're not commenting.
The
you're-
difference is just that, but
Yeah.
it creates a verbal and a verbal and visual record.
Well, so does recording, yeah, that's right, we won't have that with Zoom, you're right.
Yeah.
All right, well, we can look at that, or if you want to look at that,
Right.
or
Yes.
ask one of us to look at it.
Yeah.
And it also puts out the opinion that we're transparent and everything. we're
Yeah.
talking about. The public can see it, whenever whoever wants to see
Yeah.
it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
It's not about-
Olivos CSD does that. Jay Freeman, it would be the person to contact. He's the tech head there. So Jay Freeman, IVCSD, they have a YouTube live stream in addition to having it on Zoom.
Okay, and I know him, so,
Facebook has that option. also.
yeah, but we don't have a Facebook page, we don't want to do that yet, I don't think, unless someone wants to manage it.
Just another expense.
balloon in the
No,
air.
I know,
Not
it's
another
just,
balloon.
so, because you do have to manage it at these parent meetings. Okay, next regular meeting, December 8th, in person,
Right.
here. All right,
To adjournment at 8:24.
got it.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I think Mr. Trindle did.
Looking forward to seeing everybody soon.
Yeah,
Likewise, Mr.
thanks.
Trindle.
Thank you very much.
Pearl, I'm gonna offer this to you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was, I thought he was gonna use it